Weeks before his supporters' assault on the U.S. Capitol, President Donald Trump's mood has been darkening as dozens of court cases failed to overturn voting results. That's according to multiple sources who say Trump's final days in the White House, a time which could have been used to tout accomplishments, have been full of rage and turmoil. Trump's January 6th speech, where he urged his supporters to fight for him, followed a tense conversation with the vice president. A source tells Reuters Trump called Mike Pence, quote, a pussy for not agreeing to overturn the electoral vote in Congress that day. Then Trump, who had wanted to join thousands of hardcore followers on Capitol Hill, relented at the advice of Secret Service. Sources say the president instead hunkered down at the White House to watch news coverage of the rioting with rapt attention. Trump's uneven response to the violence hours later left some of his aides stunned. Trump also watched some of the impeachment debate on TV, and a source tells Reuters grew angry at the Republican defections. This coming after a sudden rupture with Pence, the resignation of disgusted senior advisors, the loss of his cherished Twitter megaphone, and as corporations rush to distance themselves from the Trump brand. Reuters spoke to more than a dozen Trump administration officials who describe a shrinking circle of loyal aides who are struggling to contain an increasingly fretful, angry, and isolated president. One seemingly still clinging to unfounded claims of election fraud. The White House declined to comment on this inside account. Pence reached out to Vice President-elect Kamala Harris on Thursday, sources familiar with the situation said, marking the first contact at that level between the outgoing and incoming administrations. 3 White House sources told Reuters that even as Trump continues to vent, he has been focused on his pardon power. The biggest question is whether he will issue an unprecedented pardon to family members and himself. That would be an extraordinary use of power never before tried by a U.S. president, and constitutional lawyers say there's no definitive answer on whether it can be done lawfully.
After the House of Representatives made Donald Trump the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice, he now faces another Senate trial, this time to determine whether or not he incited an insurrection. But there are several other key differences and more historic firsts to come in Trump's second impeachment trial, says Reuters legal correspondent Jan Wolf. In the trial, Trump's legal team is likely to argue that his remarks before his supporters stormed the Capitol were not a call to violence and were protected under the First Amendment. But some legal experts say that's beside the point. At least 17 Republicans would have to join the Democrats to convict Trump, and more Republican senators have said they'd consider doing so this time around. While the Senate would need a 2/3 majority to convict Trump, historical precedent suggests the Senate would only need a simple majority to disqualify him from holding office in the future, but Wolf says few really know how that would play out in this case. In Trump's last impeachment, the House charged him with abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, stemming from his request.
Scattered vaccine shortages cropped up on the front lines of the U.S. battle against the coronavirus pandemic on Friday, prompting at least one large healthcare system to cancel a slew of appointments of people hoping to be inoculated. The supply chain blips arose as the country struggles to speed up the pace of vaccinations, which totaled 12.3 million according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. In New York, the country's most populous city, Mayor Bill de Blasio said the city has vaccinated about 300,000 of its more than 8 million residents, but was on course to run dry next week because it was burning through vaccines faster than they were being replenished, telling WNYC Radio, quote, "If there's no supply, we're going to have to freeze the appointment system." A Mount Sinai hospital spokeswoman said sudden changes in vaccine supply forced it to cancel appointments through next Tuesday. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo blamed the supply gaps on the federal government, which he said had cut supplies this week to 250,000 doses from 300,000, while expanding the eligibility to include 7 million of the state's 19 million residents, though Cuomo disputed de Blasio's prediction that the city would run out of doses. In Oregon, Governor Kate Brown said a federal official told her the state would not receive additional vaccine supplies because the federal government has none in reserve. Brown wrote on Twitter, quote, "I am demanding answers from the Trump administration. I am shocked and appalled that they have set an expectation on which they could not deliver, with such grave consequences." Brown's comments followed a report in the Washington Post that the federal government has no remaining reserve of the 2 approved vaccines. Citing unidentified officials, the Post said the reserve, which the government said was initially set aside for the second doses that each vaccine requires, had already been distributed starting in late December.
It's been found that people across the world are likely to say yes to getting a COVID-19 vaccine, but trust levels vary when it comes to where it's been developed. An international survey of nearly 19,000 people conducted by the polling company YouGov found that the public became more wary of shots made in China or Russia than those developed in Germany or the United States. The overall results were shared exclusively with Reuters and showed that 73% of Britons and 70% of Danes were the most willing to take the COVID-19 vaccine when it becomes available to them. Conversely, more than a third of people surveyed in Poland and almost half of those in France, 37% and 48% respectively, said that they would say no to the shot if offered it. In the United States, just less than half of those polled said they would be willing to have the vaccine. The survey also asked about views on compulsory vaccines, a policy being discussed by some governments to boost the population's immunity. It was most popular in India at 77%, but only backed by 29% of Americans. Previous studies have found that conspiracy theories and misinformation fuels mistrust and raises concerns of not enough overall uptake to fully protect communities from the disease. Friday's YouGov poll found that despite many who said that they would not take the COVID-19 vaccine now, most gave their reason as preferring to wait and see, showing that relatively few were driven by entrenched anti-vaxxer views.
Oxygen supplies are flown to the coronavirus-hit Amazonas state by the Brazilian army, as fears grew worldwide on Friday over a new Brazilian variant of the disease, which researchers say could be contributing to a sharp rise in cases there. Nearly 6,000 people have died in Amazonas from COVID-19, and it's now in the grip of a devastating second wave. Scientists are trying to work out whether this variant is more contagious than earlier ones, but there are signs it is spreading overseas. That concern led Britain to ban travellers from Brazil and other South American countries as a result, as well as banning Portugal, which has close ties to Brazil, after Japan said it had detected the Brazilian variant in 4 travellers from Amazonas. Amazonas extended its urgent call for oxygen to the United States, as hospitals in the capital, Manaus, neared breaking point. Scores of patients are being airlifted from Manaus, an isolated city deep in the Amazon rainforest, to other states. The variant found in Brazil has 12 mutations, including one also found in the highly contagious variants discovered in Britain and South Africa. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has been lambasted for downplaying the severity of Brazil's outbreak, though it's the world's second deadliest. As pressure mounts on the country to get vaccinations underway, he cast doubt on the shot's efficacy on Thursday. "As a leader, I wouldn't force you to take it," he says, adding that it isn't, quote, "scientifically proven." Brazil plans to start inoculations in the middle of next week.
A deliberate show of military might from North Korea and its leader, Kim Jong-un. The country held an extravagant parade on Thursday and included the showcasing of what appeared to be a new submarine-launched ballistic missile. It caps off more than a week of political meetings, with Kim waving from a balcony at cheering crowds below. The parade featured rows of marching soldiers as well as a range of military hardware, including tanks and rocket launchers. At the end, a number of what analysts said appeared to be a range of new short-range ballistic missiles, including the submarine versions rolled into the square on trucks. Experts say North Korea is seeking to develop an operational submarine to carry the missiles. It hasn't tested a nuclear bomb or fired its longest-range missile since 2017. But Kim has signalled that that period may now be at an end, since dialogue with the US and its outgoing President Donald Trump has stalled. North Korean officials have been meeting in Pyongyang for the first party conference in 5 years and rounded off proceedings with a large-scale group photo that included Kim and several thousand members of Congress.
The start of earnings season failed to give Wall Street the excitement investors hoped for. The Dow fell 177 points on Friday, the S&P 500 lost 27, the Nasdaq declined 114. JP Morgan Chase, America's largest bank, beat quarterly forecasts. It released nearly $3 billion from the reserve fund set up to cover loans it feared would go bad after the economy cratered in the spring. It did throw a note of caution out there that loan demand was likely to remain sluggish this year. Citigroup topped profit forecasts, but higher costs and a fall in revenues at its consumer business dented any enthusiasm for the results. It released $1.5 billion that it set aside to cover loan defaults. Wells Fargo rounded out the day with a small rise in quarterly profits, which helped the tarnished bank exceed estimates. Its finances are still hampered by a series of past scandals. Wells Fargo was one of the worst performing stocks in the S&P 500. JP Morgan was down 1.8%. Citigroup took a 7% beating. Another thing weighing on the market, President-elect Biden's $1.9 trillion stimulus plan released the day before. With the Senate evenly split between Democrats and Republicans, investors like Mercadian Asset Management's Ken Kamen wonder how much of the Biden plan will even see the light of day. Investors also had to contend with mixed economic data. U.S. retail sales suffered their third straight monthly drop in December, confirming signs the economy ended the year in a struggle. But there was a bright spot. Manufacturing output increased more than expected last month.